Home. It's where you build your legacy, where traditions are started, seeds are planted, meals are shared, and stories are told. We are Chris and Natalie Carpenter, owners of Story Real Estate, and our team of top agents helps people find homes in Moscow, Idaho, and around the country.
Have you thought about a move? Contact us to get connected with a top agent who shares your values and puts your family first. Or reach out to us about our Moscow relocation guide.
Wherever you're looking to go, we can help you find home. Call us at Story Real Estate or visit us at storyrealestate.com and start building your legacy.
Looking for a job isn't easy. It used to be that you could apply at a big name tech company and build a great career for yourself. But times have changed. Many of these companies have gone full woke. And if you aren't the right gender, ethnicity, you don't use pronouns, or if you're not an activist for the preferred cause, then good luck. Why would you risk your career on that? At Red Balloon, we're connecting good employees with top quality companies that value you for your skills and your work ethic, not your social activism score. Employers who post jobs on Red Balloon are focused on creating an enjoyable and productive work culture, free from divisive woke mandates. So if you want to find a serious career path without the nonsense, come to Red Balloon and post your resume today. Because you shouldn't have to choose between your job and your values. That's redballoon.work, where you can find your future.
Hey y'all, it's Monday evening. Good to be with you on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Cross Politic is here with Pastor Toby Chuck Knox, the Water Boy. Coming off this weekend, if you haven't joined the club this weekend, then today's the day to join the club. Yeah. It's Monday.
You still haven't joined.
Every day's the day, but today just feels. So there's something about today that feels right about joining the club.
If you hear his voice,
I was just about to
do not harden your heart.
Harden not your heart.
Charismatic in me was
as
about
you did
to.
in the wilderness. Hey, this show's brought to you by Reformation Heritage Books. Reformation Heritage Books is a publisher and bookseller whose mission is, by the Spirit's grace, to aim for the conversion of unbelievers and equip the saints to serve Jesus and his church through biblical, experiential, and practical ministry via books, tracts, and other resources. Reformation Heritage Books is committed to the conviction that the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments, as originally written, are God's inerrant word, inspired by his Spirit, and therefore are the only sufficient and infallible authority for faith and practice. So check out Reformation Heritage Books today.
Awesome.
We're really grateful to have with us Colonel Grant Newsham is one of the few Americans with decades of on-the-ground experience in the Indo-Pacific, talking honestly and precisely about the haunting things he's seen. He's watching many of his predictions on China come true, and he explains it all in his brand new book entitled When China Attacks. Colonel Newsham, thanks for joining us on Cross Politic.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, so how do you see China currently attacking the United States?
Well, they're already attacking us.
Yes.
We just don't call it a war.
Okay.
Our view of war is like a 100-yard dash, where the two guys go up to the start line, they stretch out and get down the crouch, and then the starter says, go.
Right.
And we start shooting. And to us, that's a war. And then the war ends at some point. Either we win, we lose, or nobody wins. But to the Chinese, that stage is just the last part, if it's even necessary. And they have been attacking us on different fronts, and they call it war for 30 years at least. And you say, well, what do I mean by that? Well, here's one: economic warfare. All of these factories, all of these jobs, all this industry that went from America to China, put people out of work, really destroyed families. That went to China, and it built up China's economy, built up their military, and look what it left America with. You go to any major American city, and even not so major American cities, and walk through what used to be so-called working class neighborhoods, and now they look worse than a war zone. But that is economic war. That strengthened China, weakened us. Biological war is another one. The COVID pandemic that came out of China, they certainly made sure that it got all over America, all over the world. Look what it did to us. Shut down our economy, and our economy was humming. China was on the back foot. They were in trouble, and we had the advantage. and it got us to give up a lot of our freedoms and liberties that nobody ever thought would happen. So that's biological war. Chemical warfare is another one. Well, the fentanyl killed 70,000 Americans last year, and it's been doing that for a number of years. The numbers are going up, and that's like taking 6 or 7 divisions of troops off the battlefield every year. And that's just the dead. And fentanyl, 99% of it comes from China. They could stop it if they want. Cyber warfare, stealing our military secrets or economic secrets, business secrets, all to weaken America, build up China. And these are very much war as the Chinese see it. We don't. We prefer it as competition. Or we just ignore it, as in the case of fentanyl, as if leprechauns are bringing it to us. So what it's doing is weakening us, setting us up for the so-called kinetic war. And that's the popular word these days for shooting. So that last stage I described, that is actually the last part from the Chinese perspective. And it's if they even need it, because you can demoralize a country, weaken it to the point that it sees resistance as futile, or even if it does try, it doesn't have the resources, the economy, the national will, or even the military to resist. So it requires a different way of looking at war to really understand what has been going on for at least 30 years.
So
Sounds
why
Russian.
it sounds Russian?
Yeah, ideological
Yeah.
subversion. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where that really kind of
Well,
originated.
it's communism.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, nah, that's right. Yeah,
So
you're right.
why are we not calling it warfare? And why is, to me, it seems to me the Biden administration is very soft on China. What's going on there?
Well, they do have, they've got a lot of people in the administration who have done business with China. And this is in the foreign affairs community, but look around President Biden's advisors, and a lot of them have some connection to China, where they have helped, say, Chinese businesses do business in the United States. And I would look at most recently, that TikTok president CEO's testimony.
Yep.
Most people focused on him. But what I looked at was this phalanx of this row of Americans behind him. These are his American frontmen who are doing everything they can to support TikTok, support the Chinese Communist Party in the U.S. And why do they do it? Well, money. If TikTok wasn't paying, those guys wouldn't be back there.
Yeah.
That has been responsible for so much of the America's really appeasement of China. The Biden administration has done some things pretty well. It's done, for example, cracking down or restricting semiconductor exports and some technology exports to China. They've done that. They've done that pretty well. Tried to help boost the American semiconductor industry, but then at the same time, they will do things like let Chinese companies list on American stock exchanges. And the Trump administration was trying to make them all delist. And now the Biden administration, while it's done some good things, it does these other things. And it almost seems schizophrenic, like it doesn't quite know what it's doing, or it's doing two different things at once. It's worth noting, and just to get a sense of how serious this is, that even the Trump administration, and I've been aware of our China policy, at least since President Nixon. I was pretty young then, but I was aware of it. Mr. Trump was the first administration to actually stand up for U.S. interests against China. None of the others had, to my way of thinking. But even within his administration, and he had some excellent advisors around him, they were fighting an internal war in the administration with the people who wanted to not upset China, to just maintain the status quo, do business with China. It was good for everybody. And it was a fierce war within the Trump administration. So that shows you just how hard it is to actually stand up for American interests in the U.S. There's always plenty of people willing to do China's bidding. And ultimately, a lot of it does come down to money.
You said going all the way back to Nixon. So, I mean, you think of Reagan as being, one of these superstars standing up to communism, especially the Soviet Union in the 80s. But you're saying you don't think, to your way of thinking, that even Reagan stood up to China as much as Trump did?
He didn't. There was still an idea that we needed China's help against Russia during the Reagan administration. And that was the thinking with Nixon as well, that if we could split China and Russia, it helped us because Russia was the main enemy. But Mr. Reagan did something, he had the right instincts, to say the least. And it was because of him that Soviet Russia, the Russian communism collapsed.
Right.
I think he deserves immense credit. You remember how he was ridiculed by the elite classes, the State Department, you name it.
Right.
They ridiculed him. They hated him. And he's the guy that did it. Mm-hmm. And I hope he's always remembered for that. Yeah. But towards China, as I said, there was still a belief that, we need to split them from Russia. So during the Reagan administration, they actually provided the Chinese with torpedo technology, very advanced, the technology to manufacture artillery shells. And they gave them that military assistance. The idea was to make them our friends. If we can bring them towards us, it draws them away from Russia. So even Reagan got it wrong about China. And once again, you look at the advisors around a president, that usually gives you a pretty good idea of how things are going to go. And he had some good ones. But still, they were just, as human beings are, we're sort of too clever by half. It seemed like a good idea, but giving the Chinese advanced torpedo technology, maybe not. So, but Mr. Reagan got it right. He had some very good people around. Mr. Trump, I think, got it right. He had Mike Pompeo, Matt Pottinger, Dave Stilwell, Miles Yu, Peter Navarro. These were guys the Chinese absolutely hated and wanted to get rid of them. And when the Chinese hate you, it's because you're doing something right.
Now, if you're Biden's chief military advisor, what would you be telling him to? How would you be advising President Biden right now about? Do we go to war with China? Do we start an official war?
We're already at war with China. It's just not kinetic.
I say official.
It's already official. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, if I was his military advisor, the first thing I would beg him to do is to force Wall Street, force the business community to stop funneling U.S. dollars and investment into China. They absolutely depend on that. Without it, there's these cracks in the Chinese system, the communist system, that would cause the whole thing to collapse. But because we keep sending this money to them, it allows them to pay for everything they need that they have to pay for in dollars. Because the Chinese currency isn't really, you can't really use it outside of China. So it's like going to a school carnival and you buy tickets.
Yeah.
Well, the tickets work, or Disneyland in the olden days.
Right.
You have a ticket and it's really good at the carnival or Disneyland, but go outside and nobody wants it. They want dollars. And that's the problem the Chinese have.
Wow.
So imagine you're sitting there in Beijing and you've got this problem of not enough dollars, not enough convertible currency. And then imagine Wall Street diverts tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of investment into your country, which means you get the money. And then American businesses invest in Western businesses, and you're getting all this money, and it's a good deal. So that's the first thing I'd tell them. Please do that, because if you don't do that, all the things you do militarily are less effective.
Right.
Now you could get the military part just right, but if you're collapsing your own economy,
right.
If you're in the U.S., half the population hates the other half. You have riots in the street. If you're spending so much money that the dollar isn't worth you have inflation. The trust in the dollar is eroding. Those are things that will bring a country down.
Right.
When people start to see each other as rival tribes rather than as Americans, that will destroy it. And that is what China would prefer to do. So what I would, if I was the advisor, I would tell them, look, get these things right. And also, we have to get our military back so it can fight and win a war with China. So China knows if they do anything, their entire navy will sink in 2 afternoons. And it has got to be such a clear sense that they will lose everything. And do whatever is necessary to do that. It requires us to start building more naval ships. We need to build all sorts of long-range missiles. And how many do you need? Well, the answer is one more. You never have enough of these.
Yeah.
And you've also got to look at I'd call it the morale, the spirit of the military. the military exists for one purpose, and that's to destroy our enemies. And it is not for social experimentation.
Yeah.
And you have got to find some senior officers who want to fight a war and not get promoted and not make sure they're politically acceptable for their next promotion.
Right.
It sounds harsh, but this is been some very troubling things that have taken place in the military.
Yeah, Colonel, I want to camp out here a little bit. You know, I was going to ask you about the free market that exists right now, and then companies looking and saying, hey, it's cheaper to make things over in China. You know, what it takes for me to make something over here in America, I can do it for a third of the cost there. And then everybody else likes it too, because if they had to make everything in America, it would go up 2/3 the cost. So we would not want to buy those things. So the answer here, it sounds like, at least your first part of the answer is a free market really is the best way to beat China, where it encourages us to make our own stuff without having to get in the margins internally than having it externally, right? I totally get that. I've always believed that in order for us to really beat China, we have to beat it with freedom. But man, there's a bigger problem here. I don't want to act fascist and force the corporate businesses to do things here in America when it doesn't benefit them economically. It seems like my best way to do things is to try and figure out how can I create a healthy and thriving American economy so no one has to go get their things over in China made, right? So when I go buy a tennis shoe, and they are giving me a tennis shoe for $3 versus having $10 made here. That's an easy thing for me to make a decision about, and that encourages people to buy from me because I'm going to have the cheaper shoe. But you're saying that this is an amount of warfare that's going on because they're doing things cheaper than we are. Well, if the warfare is, I don't want to be fascist. How do I encourage a free market here in America where companies want to do business here in America than having it shipped all the way over there, flown over here, or go over by sea, whatever? How do I encourage that kind of market right now?
Well, there's a few things that you can do. You know, I understand how it looks, and you do have to look at it a little more broadly. And that is, what is the cost of long-term unemployment? People losing their jobs in America. You know, these families where nobody's ever had a job, they live on welfare. They're susceptible to the drug abuse that comes with that, all the social problems. It's not the actual costs of shipping jobs overseas and to China.
Yeah.
Isn't just a question of can you make it cheaper and what's your return on investment. So it's actually this is where politicians, the political class, has to look at the bigger picture. And that's one issue, is look at the full cost. We say $3 tennis shoes versus $12 back when New Balance used to make them in Boston.
Right.
But look at once again, close down that New Balance factory and what happens there. And you see that with more advanced manufacturing. So that needs to be considered. Plus, very often when the companies go to China, it's because they can pay people less than they in America, and they don't have to worry about labor unions. They don't have to worry about environmental costs. So once again, that's it's not a level market at all. Yeah. And that's something that needs to be considered. But also, a bigger thing is we're really playing by two sets of rules. We say, well, it's easy to do business in China, but in America, it's hard to do business. Well, when China has different rules for companies doing business there. And so if an American company goes to China, what is going to happen is that the Chinese strategy is to let them in, steal their technology, their know-how, build up your own competition, and put them out of business and replace them with a Chinese company. So it's not, you're going into this game where the rules, it's a rigged casino if you go in there.
Yeah.
And yet you have CEOs going in there. And if the situation was the same in China as it is, say there's no legal system, a contract means exactly what Xi Jinping says it means. There's government's stated objective is to drive you out of business and replace you with a Chinese company. If that was the state, say in North Carolina, nobody would go there. Nobody would do business.
Right.
But because it's China, it's like Westerners they go insane at the idea of China, just fabulous wealth, and it doesn't really pay off over the long term. Even Elon Musk is going to figure this out. before too long. That they will have his technology and there'll be his competition. He'll be gone. So you have to. America has. This is once again, leadership is required to insist on reciprocity. If the Chinese market is this rigged, well, no Chinese company should ever be allowed to do business here. Look at in every other area. We have to. Reciprocity is a pretty good guideline. Another thing that's interesting is I used to work for a Wall Street firm, and I was always interested in what is the actual return. How much more of a return on investment do you get if you do business in China versus America? And you think it would be like 10%, 20%. It's actually some tiny fraction. It's not a huge amount. And if you were to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., it's not like your tennis shoes would suddenly cost $300. It's not a huge amount. And you think of the benefits that come of that, the social, the benefits to our society. But once again, it takes people to point this out. It takes a government to force businesses to really not sell out their own their employees, their customers, etc. In fact, I would suggest that it'd be nice if states' attorney generals were bringing lawsuits against some of these companies that do business in China, because it is so reckless. As I said, it is a business environment that if it was in any other country, you wouldn't go in there, and is absolutely reckless with shareholder money. But if you're a CEO, if you can make, or an executive at a certain level, if you can just make it one killing, one payday, you don't really care what happens.
Wow.
So also there's really a moral aspect to all of this. And this is that in China, they harvest organs from prisoners,
right?
Often political prisoners, people who are religious people who they don't like their religion.
Yep.
And they take the organs out of them, also sometimes while they're still alive. And this is no small thing in Xinjiang. And there's actually a fast track through the airport for the organ business.
Wow.
And there's a moral aspect to this, that what sort of a business person overlooks that, keeps their eyes shut while this is being done. And that's just one aspect of human rights abuse. And remember, for example, South Africa in the apartheid era. Remember the protests about that.
Right.
You had businesses, a lot of businesses wanted to keep doing business, but they were pressured, the protests, the Sullivan principles, etc. And they had to back off.
Right.
And it really hurt South Africa. But with China, which is actually doing worse things than the South Africans ever dreamed of doing,
right?
That nobody says a word. Tim Cook of Apple's there, and kowtowing to the Chinese. And so those are some ideas. But there's a political leadership that's required. There's citizens that need to protest this. Shareholders can vote with their money. Be nice if there were reporters who actually covered these issues.
Yeah.
And also some, another just as a tactical thing is, remember when we had for that brief period of energy independence, when the cost of energy was going down, that makes it cheaper to manufacture here.
Right.
So there has to be a willingness to get off of this addiction to the Chinese market.
Wow. I want to follow up on that, but first I got to read one more ad, and then I'm going to come back to you, Colonel. This year, our Fight, Laugh, Feast conference is at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky.
China
Better
free.
Get out there. China free.
Made in America. The politics of six-day creation. The politics of six-day creation is the difference between a fixed standard of justice and a careening standard of justice. The difference between the corrosive relativism and postmodernism that creates mobs and anarchy and the freedom of objectivity, truth, and due process. The politics of six-day creation establishes the authority and sufficiency of God's word for all of life, from what is a man, what is a woman, when does human life begin, and how is human society best organized. Come out and hear Ken Ham, Pastor Doug Wilson, Dr. Ben Merkel, Dr. Gordon Wilson. I'll be there. The whole crew will be there. We'll do a live show, of course. Mark your calendars for October 11th through the 14th as we fight, laugh, and feast with beer and psalms, our amazing lineup of speakers, rowdy Christian merch, and a Sabbath feast to wrap up the occasion. So sign up today.
And we're starting the conference off Beer and Psalms on Wednesday night this year. Usually we do Thursday because everyone is going to go kind of hang out at the Creation Museum on Thursday.
Okay.
And then we have our business makers pre-conference on Thursday afternoon, and then Toby does his first talk. So the conference is structured a little different, so everyone can kind of actually enjoy the ARC encounter and everything that's going on.
FLFnetwork.com. FLFnetwork.com. Sign up today.
Hey, Colonel, I have a bunch of questions, but one of the ones that you were talking about earlier when you were saying that they need our money, it made me think that they're kind of like crypto. It's nice to have and it looks good on paper, but you can't really spend it anywhere. So, but what is so what are they using the NBA for? Because the NBA, it's got huge.
I was thinking about that when he was talking earlier about the moral element, and we've had a few prominent like basketball people and coaches
Players.
and stuff stand up and be like, free Hong Kong or the Uyghurs, bringing awareness to that, and then they get shouted down.
Or even like what was it? They were out there. They were supposed to be doing a whole kind of game or something out there, and they got canceled because of the Uyghurs.
Well, they do a summer tour.
A summer tour out there.
Yeah.
So they get shut down, but they shut down the whole thing. So what is the play with China and the NBA?
Well, whenever you can get influential people in a country to kind of put in a good word for you, that's priceless. And sports stars are influential, and when you can get them to shut down criticism of what you're doing, that's a win, to put it mildly. Remember that fellow at Maury with the Houston Rockets?
Yeah.
Yes,
he said he hit for something like that for Hong Kong.
Yeah,
and they got you saw how quickly the NBA. I don't know what a nice word for it is, but they got down on their knees. And it was astonishing. But in the end, this is an influential organization in the country that China considers its main enemy. And here they are defending the People's Republic of China.
Right.
Whereas this idea, the human rights violations alone should cause us to just almost have nothing to do with China until they reform.
Yeah.
But here you have prominent NBA figures saying, well, you don't know, you have to do more homework. We can't criticize them. We're as bad as them, which we're not even within 100 miles of them. And think of the benefit that is. China is trying to keep the Americans from getting tough with them. And here you have a prominent organization doing this. That's worth whatever cost the Chinese pay the NBA.
So it has to be a lot, because when you look at it, just the optics of it, that you have black men who have been so woke that no 3 generations will ever sleep again. These guys are so woke, and who are very concerned about all the police brutality from American officials. Yeah. And then you got people literally selling parts of other individuals in the country, and they all go quiet. It just doesn't.
It's complicated. It's really complicated, Knox.
I'm not for the government doing too much, but if we're at war like you say we are, how do you sever this relationship?
I think ultimately it's going to take real political leadership, like a Ronald Reagan, like a Trump. But I think it will require government force. By force, it's not police showing up at your door, but it's going to have to pass laws that prohibit the investment in China, and both financial, but also technological investment, supplying technology to China. You're going to have to make that against the law. And will that happen? I don't know, because the donor class is so influential here. But there also has to be an awareness that China sees us as the main enemy. And you just cannot do business with a country that they say that they are going to finish us off. And once again, that's where shareholder lawsuits, attorney generals bringing suits against companies for doing this would be helpful. Public outrage at some point. I don't know when that's going to happen. But if you don't accept that you have an enemy, and I could use the word opponent or adversary, but read the Chinese press for a week, and they have English translations, and listen, you read the venom that is in there and what they say about us. It is just sickening. And yet they say it, they're very clear about what they're going to do, and we do nothing. So it's going to take an awakening of sorts. And when will that happen? I don't know. But to get Wall Street and the business class to remember what country's name is on their passports. That's going to take some coercion. But at some point, the Chinese will probably overreach, do something that even those guys can't ignore. But it'd be nice if we could cut off China without having to sort of experience the trouble that's coming our way.
Colonel, what would you think? We've talked about this on the show before, but a little more, free market chess maybe that could actually be used in this war. So, for example, I remember when the whole NBA China thing blew up and then the Hong Kong thing happened, we were thinking like, well, why don't the NBA players go play a bunch of games in Hong Kong? Why not fight with?
Because they would lose millions and millions and millions of dollars.
But I'm saying if we're really at war with China,
right,
and the NBA had their head on straight, and they could actually be part of that fight.
Well, there's a lot of ifs.
I know. And if LeBron James, but like use some tools, use some maneuvers like that. It's like, okay, well, we're just going to go to Hong Kong and hoop up in Hong Kong.
Right.
Let's fight that way. I don't kind of a lot of what if scenario there, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they should. Once upon a time they would have.
Yeah.
But it's the money, and I've seen this. It's not just the NBA, but if you, generally speaking, at least my experience in the business world and in the financial world, is that if you just the whiff of money will get most people to perform. Like you go to SeaWorld, you see a sea lion that thinks he's going to get a mackerel snack.
Yep.
It sounds cynical, but that's kind of how it works. And on Capitol Hill, those the donor class has undue influence. And so it's a tough. We know what the challenge is. Now, how do you get people to? I hesitate to say do the right thing because that's subjective, but certainly putting in a good word for organ harvesting, that's a pretty easy one. And it's if how we're going to overcome that sort of world-class hypocrisy, I don't know. I wish I did.
Hold on, wait. Okay, Colonel, do you have 10 more minutes? Can we hold you for 10 more minutes? Okay.
Sure.
I don't know what your question is. Yeah, I want to go backstage, but I want to talk about Ukraine and Russia in relationship to China. I think that's a whole, flank here that we haven't discussed yet. What were you going to say, Pastor?
And I guess I want to push a little bit more on the ideology side of things, thinking like communists.
I wanted to ask them about Pastor Wang Yi and
we'll do all that stuff backstage. So where can we buy your book at that would benefit you the best, Colonel?
Oh, it's I know it's available at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, even Sam's Club picked it up.
Okay,
which is good. I was pleased to hear that.
Don't they get a lot of things from China?
Well, this will not after they read the book. So I was a little surprised. Your point is well taken. I was a little surprised, but it's written for as I say, it's people who looked up at that balloon, the spy balloon, a couple months ago, and said, "What is going on? What's the deal with China?"
Yeah.
My book actually explains, how we got where we are, what China intends to do, what happens if we lose, and how we avoid losing.
When China attacks.
The big spy balloon.
By
Colonel big advertisement.
Grant Newsham.
It was just an advertisement nationwide for his book.
Colonel, stay right there. We'll be to you in just a second. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic.
All right, do I get to go first?
You get to go first.
Can I go first?
Sure.
I think I have to leave first.
Okay, so go ahead.
So Colonel, I was thinking about how we got here. I mean, we're kids of the '80s, so I mean, I grew up at the end of the Cold War. Ronald Reagan, tear this wall down, Mr. Gorbachev, and all the war movies were, the bad guys were China and Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I grew up in, and that's my sort of patriotic. Yeah. My imagination was formed by all those, Top Gun and those kind of movies, and it was the communists were the bad guys. And
Rocky,
Yeah, exactly right. All of it. Yeah. It was the Soviets and it was the Chinese and it was the communists were the bad guys. And And I'm just thinking to myself, how do we get to the point where we don't think of the commies as the bad guys? I mean, even the most recent Top Gun, as you know, sort of as old school as it was and fun, you know, sort of this unnamed enemy group. We don't know who it is,
but we're going after them.
But they're bad, and we're
training for this scenario.
You know, kind of like Russians, but not.
Yeah, we're not sure. And but I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm a pastor, so I'm thinking a little bit about just kind of worldview and religious convictions, and it seems to me that. In many respects, I mean, my instinct is to say part of the problem is that we have embraced various elements of socialism and sort of soft communism in our culture, which makes it like we see them as a lot more like us than we used to. I think there used to be a more Christian consensus, a broadly, you know, Judeo-Christian worldview as Americans, and we saw the atheism of communism and the totalitarian nature of the governments that go with that. Because if there is no God above, then there's God. You know, we're going to be God, basically. Do you think that's true? I mean, I know you spent time there. You know American culture as well. You know, how do we go from seeing them as the enemies that they were and are to, you know, barely, you know, much of a threat at all? And do you think that it has to do with our own American cultural values, basically embracing portions of parts of the communist worldview?
Well, it's, people probably write books about that, but it is very different. You know, as you said, you know, when I was young, it was the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, and there's these sinister-looking East European types. Yeah. And, you know, then you kind of knew that, you know, Russians and communism was bad. We grew up with that. Yeah. But with China, it's been more like the lovable panda. You know, China, you know, you never went to a Russian restaurant, but you'd go to the like Chinese restaurants, you know, House of Hunan. It's very nice and people are friendly. But that's maybe there's probably more to it than just that. Right. But we got off on with China. Starting with, we mentioned Nixon and Ronald Reagan, but really with President George W. Bush. Starting then, the idea was that if we helped China grow, helped them get economically strong, they would turn into a giant Canada because they would, you know, they have a middle class that demanded political freedom. Right. And you know, and it would just change naturally to the so-called responsible stakeholder that was a good member of the world community. And that was a hypothesis. Wow. So we did everything. You know, there's a letter on the internet that George Bush wrote to Deng Xiaoping right after the Tiananmen Square massacre, when the Chinese Communist Party, you know, shot down some thousands of its own people. Wow. And you read the letter and it's sickening. You know, it's like, I know you've had some hard times lately, but we'll get through this and we want you to succeed. I mean, you have to read it. And it just sets the tone for everything that came, this inrush of American industry and finance into China. And then the Clinton administration just let them into WTO, the World Trade Organization. And once you did that, that was a huge mistake. And the Clintons, of course, were also taking nice amounts of money. There were books written about it, and nobody has sued the authors of the books. But this has continued. And it was a hypothesis that was proven wrong after probably a decade, but they kept at it for another 15, 20 years. Wow. And they still kind of are. And now more people are saying, well, look, they're a rival, they're an enemy. We have to do something. Well, welcome. You know, it's like you've discovered gravity. But even the U.S. military, you know, until as late as, say, 2015, 16, you could not publicly say China was even an adversary. Wow. And that's how starting off with the idea that China was going to transform into a less threatening country, that got us in the wrong direction. And also the idea, if you do that, you can convince yourself, well, if they're not, because we're doing something wrong. We're scaring them. You know, we're doing something they don't like, so the problem's with us. Right. And, you know, in many respects, the problem has been mental. And in fact, you know, I think most things are largely psychological. And the Chinese have successfully gotten us to think that we're the problem, not them. And, so that's like a lot of things in life. If, sometimes you wake up in time, think, man, what was I thinking?
Right.
But that's a large part of that. And the successful political, psychological warfare against that the Chinese have waged against us. But it is striking how different it is from how we treated the Russians. But the Chinese, I think, are a bigger threat to us than the Russians were. Though that's something best seen in hindsight. But I think they do pose a real threat to us now. Obviously, that's why I wrote the book.
You don't feel suicidal, do you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Like you're healthy, right?
You're healthy.
You didn't get the jab or anything, did you?
No, but my book actually. No, I see what you mean here. But no, I worked for Motorola and watched them commit suicide in China. So no.
Okay.
No, and I'm a small fish, but it's I suppose everybody's on China's list somewhere. I think could probably be offended if you weren't.
Well, Colonel, I just want you to know, we're nobodies too, but we did a show with
Naomi
Wolf.
Naomi Wolf.
And she was just walking through kind of China's
connections to Biden family.
Well, not just that, but their connection to why the pandemic went this way. Their software, what they need with that software to work, face recognition, just the whole kind of World Economic Forum connection. And they took that show, which was in a private hosting, and they gutted it. They just removed it, and it wasn't public.
Vimeo deleted it.
Vimeo deleted it from their server, which it wasn't a public show. It was a private one. So they're out there. They have their spawn out there doing their thing.
They've come after us and deleted it.
It doesn't. It's for them. They just don't need this information out there. But before you go, I just want to ask: as we look at the Ukraine and Russia situation, China is involved in this as well. What's the connection between the three of them, and why is it important?
I think, well, there's a couple. Why is it important? One, a member of the UN Security Council has invaded an independent country because it wants it.
Right.
And that was supposed to, we're supposed to have gotten over that. And this is simply cannot happen. It can't be allowed to be seen as successful. On that principle alone, it needs to be dealt with. But what the Russians and the Chinese have going is sort of mutual. They've got an exchange in mind. And in return for China's support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, when the time comes and China throws its weight around in Asia, say against Taiwan, it fully expects to receive Russia's support. The Chinese were even saying this when Putin invaded Ukraine, the Chinese said, well, we've been instructed not to criticize it because when the time comes, we expect Russia will return the favor.
Wow.
And that's so. This is an alignment of two very powerful and aggressive dictatorships. Yes, the Russians and the Chinese at some level don't like each other, but for now, their strategic interests align. And it's not just Russia and China. It's a lot of there's the Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and other like-minded nations. It sort of looks like those dictatorships are on a roll. But those things, nothing's forever. And, we've been in tough spots before and have come out of it pretty well, unfortunately, with a lot of heartache. But I don't think the game's over at all. It may be the bottom of the seventh and we're down by 3. But there's still some time left and we have a good hand to play. But with the China-Ukraine business, I really do advise looking at it as the Russians and the Chinese are like-minded and they're partners, and they don't mean us well.
Wow.
So they're not necessarily sharing interest in things. They're just looking at each other to scratch each other's back when it comes time to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. And there's one advantage. Well, actually, the Chinese are helping the Russians with military equipment, providing financial support, buying a ton of oil from them. And that is very helpful for the Russians. And when the time comes, China will get paid back. But also, at some point in the distant future, China believes that a good chunk of Russia's Far East was stolen from China.
Okay.
And they intend to get it back at some point. So
there we
interesting.
go.
So they like to see Russia get weakened. The more the Russians get worked over, the more China has the upper hand in that relationship. And I think they like that.
Do you think we're entering like World War III?
I think if you'd asked the question in 1938, do you think we're entering World War II? I think many people said, no, it's just unthinkable that could happen. And they could have given you a very good reasons why it couldn't have happened. And it did in ways that most people didn't expect. And I say potentially, we are in a very difficult situation. And I don't know that if I was a betting person, I'd probably make a small bet that's where we will end up. I wouldn't bet all my money on it because I think we still have time. But same thing in 1938, there was still time.
Right.
But you'd have been wise to make at least a small bet on Hitler and Stalin doing what they did.
Wow. Well, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much,
Colonel. Thank you for your book, and great to talk to you.
Well, my pleasure. No, I always appreciate the opportunity. I tell people I'm not enough of a public figure to think I'm doing anyone a favor, but rather it's the reverse. I appreciate the opportunity, and I always learn things.
This is very helpful. This is extremely helpful.
Thank you very much, Colonel.
Appreciate your work.
Thank you, Colonel.
Have a great day.
Pleasure. Okay, thanks.
Free men need to be able to protect their families. It's really sad to see people hurt, livelihoods destroyed, even homes destroyed, just to make a political point. Free men take action when churches face heartbreaking attacks. And while cowards stand idle, free men run towards the sound of gunshots when children are in danger. I'm so thankful for free men who stand ready with the tools of liberty.